Minister, thank you very much for your opening your office to African Media Australia.
Thanks very much, Clyde. Good to be with you.
Now, you've been Minister in charge of Multicultural Affairs for several months now. How's things going?
Well, I was delighted when the Premier gave me the opportunity to take up this portfolio. I obviously was Minister for Planning in the last term of government, and then to bring together planning, housing and multicultural affairs is a very, very good mix and a very neat fit together, I think, because obviously for many of our emerging communities, public and social housing is very important to them. And we know, for instance, that particularly our bigger high-rise public housing estates host significant numbers of African community members who reside, particularly in my own electorate, actually of Richmond, where we've got big housing estates, and yes, we've got a range of challenges there, but as a government, we are very welcoming of these communities.
Now, this portfolio that you've got, Multicultural Affairs, it's already such a busy portfolio. How are you coping with all that?
Yes, there are big demands on me as Minister for Multicultural Affairs, but you get great joy out of, earlier this year we had very big African events earlier this year at Federation Square. Very hot day, but the wonderful atmosphere and the welcome that I was provided with really is something very special.
Now, let's talk about the Victorian African Community Plan. What's happening with it? We don't hear much. The community doesn't seem to hear much from this whole thing. What's happening?
Well, as you know, it was launched in April of last year by my colleague Robin Scott, of course, who was the Minister for Multicultural Affairs. The July budget provided, of that year, 2018, provided 2 years' worth of funding of $8.6 million. We think that was an important initiative. Obviously, we then went out to establish an implementation committee. So there were 17 members, and we had an expression of interest. We've got 17 members on that, and it's chaired by my colleague Danny Pearson, who's been doing a terrific job. And I think, and it's important that someone like Danny is on this task for us, because he also hosts a very significant number of African communities within his own electorate as well. So he also has very first-hand experience, and I'm pleased that he's taken that job up. So there were a number of recommendations made, and I accepted all of those in April of this year. The key to that, I think, is the priorities that have in fact been established through the work of the committee, the implementation committee, particularly around employment, education, and the third arm of that is more social integration.
All right. Now, since it was launched, and obviously these priorities have been identified, I actually put a cross...
Sorry, there was one other thing I should have said.
That's all right.
Obviously, social integration more generally, but also drug and alcohol support is obviously very important, particularly for young people who... Anyway, we can talk a bit more about that probably.
That's right. We'll talk about young people in a moment. Many members of the African community, especially community leaders, seem to take the view that since the launch happened and there was this agreement on partnership, the government working with the community partnership,
sure.
Not much of that partnership is really happening. It looks like not only very few things have happened since then, but they don't seem, from the outset, we don't seem to see much partnership coming out from the government. Even the implementation committee seems to be quite quiet. They would want to hear more from this committee and see what's happening it's been quite a long time. There's been almost no announcement in that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, we had an election, obviously. We've had a change of minister, but the committee is doing good work. And I don't think it would be fair to characterise it that not much is happening. I mean, some of the work that the government is involved with is reaching out into communities already. I was in Dandenong only, 4 or 5 weeks ago, announcing some important funding for that particular region, with very specifically related to African community members there. I think we are really starting to get on top of the question of employment, because I think this is a really important, and I wanted to indicate to you that over 200 young Victorians, 15 to 24, of African heritage, have been supported into work through the Jobs Victoria services since 2016. Now, 200 is a good number. Is it enough? No, it's not. Can we do more? Yes, we can. And I well recall a meeting that the Premier attended with me with African leaders, where he sat next to me and he said to that assembled group, "I am sick of locking up African young people. We have to do better." And he was very much in the space of saying that education and employment and direct intervention in employment is what the government has done and will continue to do. What does that mean? It means in big projects, and we've got a huge infrastructure agenda, as you know, and it's fully funded. $12 billion a year, and in the out years about $10 billion. So we've got a massive program of infrastructure, and we are saying that we are going to provide a direct intervention with African community members to say, here is your doorway through to a job.
All right. What we've seen in the past is that when there's a program, the government will, announce this is a program, there's funding applied, provided, and this funding goes to some particular agency, such as the Job Victoria that you've mentioned. But there's very little community involvement in terms of how these programs are both designed, implemented, assessed, and all that sort of thing. We were thinking that would change with the Victorian African Community Plan, because there was a key emphasis on working in partnership with the community. But many community leaders, at least up to now, think that not much of that is happening. Some money is being released for the Victorian African Community Plan. It goes to the same big agencies that can provide services. Very little partnership with the community. What do you respond to that?
Well, I would be disappointed if that was a general view. I think that, I take that observation on notice. And if we have to do better in terms of engagement, of course we will. There is no diminution in the commitment of this government to supporting the African community. And yes, there are a number of well-established peak organisations who can deliver services, but my interest is to ensure that we deliver them in both an efficient and an effective way. But I'm not immune to ensuring that we actually are working with communities as well. And and I simply point to the funding that we provided in Dandenong, and we will continue to work with communities.
Now, do you as a minister have the same commitment to the Victorian African Community Plan as your predecessor?
Of course. It is implementing the plan that was put in place. We said we've got the $8.6 million over 2 years, where we will progressively roll that out, and we have agreed with all of the recommendations in that plan.
And other than what's happening within the implementation committee, is there any mechanisms where you kind of consult and go back with, sort of go along with the community as the plan is being implemented, and to make sure that it's something that is being done in full partnership?
Well, clearly it's the responsibility, it's my responsibility, but it's also the responsibility of the Victorian Multicultural Commission as well, of which we have, of course, as you're aware, a number of representatives of the African community and my work in engaging with the African community more generally is that I have to hear that voice. I mean, I was out with the Western Bulldogs only recently to celebrate the fantastic work that they are doing with the African community out in that part of the world. I mean, it's beautiful work. I do as much as I can to both be informed about the issues and be very clear-eyed about what some of those challenges are, but also clearly I have a very large African community who are in my electorate, and it's my job to listen to them and to represent them as well with many of the challenges that they have, whether it's in relation to housing, whether it's in relation to schooling, and their capacity for broader community opportunities.
Now, maybe one more question on this, and then we go to the youth. For community leaders out there who feel like not just they are not seeing much, they don't have much visibility on what's happening, or if they would like to contact your office to make sure that some of their views about how things should progress are conveyed to you, what do they do?
My door is always open.
Okay, let's go to the youth now. Obviously, there's quite a number of issues relating to youth in the African community. What's your department doing specifically at this moment, besides some of the things that are happening in the Victorian African Community Plan? What are your priorities in addressing this issue?
Well, as I indicated earlier, I mean, we have three priority areas that we are obviously fundamentally interested in. And $3 million has already been allocated to obviously education, employment, and drug and alcohol issues.
I live in Wyndham,
Yep.
and there's a significant growth of Wyndham population, as you know, and many
There is.
African families are choosing that area
Yes.
for their residence. Now, we don't seem to see much happening in terms of what the government is doing for the young people. There's a Wynne Education Center that is in charge of the CSG that is happening with South Sudanese community. But being a growth area and some of these issues that have happened previously have happened there seems not to be not much happening there. Why?
Well, I think it is a partnership between state government and local government as well. Wyndham is one of the fastest growing growth areas in the state, where we'll be putting some data out shortly which talks about Wyndham, the population of Wyndham being very, very significant. And I'll just give you one piece of data which is pretty phenomenal, that in growth areas like Wyndham, there are in excess almost 140 children born every week. 140. Many of those, across the broader community, and of course there'll be African children will be born there, of course. So when you think about those sorts of challenges, 140 children a week is the equivalent of 6 classrooms of children a week. So it gives you some sense of the scale of population. But we actually we celebrate that, but we recognise that challenge as well, and that's why our partnering up with both federal, state, and local government is so crucial to this, and we want to ensure that people have got decent housing, but also employment opportunities as well, and the schools. I mean, the commitment that the government has made to a capital works program for our schools is absolutely critical to ensuring that we've got an appropriate offering for the broader community, not just the African community, but the broader community.
Well, let's talk a little bit about young people in detention. I know the Justice Department is different from yours, but it somehow connects with multiculturalism as well.
Of course it does.
Lots of these young African kids who go into prison, they come out, they don't get rehabilitated properly. Is there anything that your department is doing or think should be done to improve that?
Well, as you rightly say, it is a responsibility of my colleague Ben Carroll, who has direct responsibility for the system, particularly the juvenile justice system. I mean, he is acutely aware of the needs of not just a cohort of African young people, but more generally young people. And I think he's made his position very clear only as recently as the last couple of weeks, where yes, we have a significant prison population, but he is much more, well, of course he has to be interested in that, but he's very interested in the whole question of rehabilitation and looking for alternative strategies for keeping young people out of prison, or juvenile justice, but when they are in the system, actually providing for them the opportunity for, particularly for education. So there is, as I'm sure you're aware, at Parkville, which is our major juvenile justice facility, there is a school, in effect a school there, and he very much sees those and the transitioning of then young people out of the system, but into safe and secure housing, which is my responsibility, and then the next step being, okay, how do we mentor you into an alternative pathway that is not based on a criminal justice outcome?